Right, hello everyone. We're just about to go. We're waiting for a couple of chairs at one of our panelists, but we'll get going because it's asked the speaker and it's fairly informal. We might as well make use of your time. Hopefully you're all familiar with this slot. We put this together to avoid the situation at conferences where the speaker comes off the stage, there's a queue of people waiting to speak to him, and the first one in the queue takes 2 minutes and the break's over. So I'm sure you've all been at the end of that queue, so I'm going to try and make sure that each of you get a chance to ask any question you've got. So we had 3 great talks this morning, and we have the speakers here. So when we do it, we're recording it as well, so I'm going to try and repeat your name and where you're from, ask a quick question, the speaker will try and paraphrase the question, and then answer it if it works, so you don't have to walk around and hand your mic. So just speak as loud as you can and clearly, that'd be great. Alright, so we had 3 great talks this morning. Anyone got a question for any of our panel? Who wants to start us off? Yes, sorry. Yeah.
So I'm Brett.
Brett from Health?
So I can talk. I'll mention. So when you say shared services, sort of the enterprise, typical services, mail, email. Okay. Yep. So we have a bit of a combination at Disney. Part of it is by design, and that is that we have multiple segments, and by literally design, each one has autonomy in terms of the technology direction. Right? So we have multiple CTOs, and within each segment there are even multiple CTOs, right? And they are all responsible for their particular group and the products are in their portfolio. And part of the design was meant to unleash them from any bureaucratic latency that could inhibit them from getting products out to market. Right? However, there's still shared services, right? There's still a need for that. And we have a enterprise technology team that Brian and I happen to be part of that support all the segments. And it's a very subscription, in a lot of ways, model where the segments look at it and say, hey, that makes a lot of sense for us. We'll subscribe to it. And so by that, we can then gain some economies of scales when it's more commodity type services, where it's more engineering, sort of deeper dive services like teams. We literally embed within the groups. Like, so I have team members that are part of, like Brian, who's part of our studio support team. He manages the engineers that are embedded in the studio. And they are literally, just as you heard on Movies Anywhere, they're in with the Movies Anywhere product teams, part of their life cycle. The cool part about that, from a shared services perspective, is that he can reach over and talk to his peers in Imagineering, right? They're all part of our same team in the shared services organization. And they can share best practices around Terraform modules, as an example, right? Share code, right? So we're sharing code configuration management, like we talked about, traction development, or even our consumer products interactive stores team. So sharing those great ideas is a little more fluid because of the way that embedded, but still back to the shared services team is organized. So other services, so we think of, I don't know, API endpoints and things like that, that varies, right? So there is like centralized mail service, Active Directory, right? You can think of those things that we at the enterprise technology layer offer out. And the majority of the enterprise does use it, but there are cases where they don't, right? Even on the network layer, right? They may create their own because they have very unique requirements, specifications they have to meet, and so they'll build their own so they can go operate faster.
From Capital One perspective, we do have shared services, and I think any big organization will have shared services, right? It's the question of the balance between how much is federated versus how much is centralized. There are a few reasons why you would want to centralize certain things, where you want better control, such as your code repository. You want to make sure that the people who are actually committing code belong to Capital One company, and the pre-receive who can catch certain sensitive information before they get actually committed. Also, you can have code scanning done on your GitHub repositories, looking for things that should not be there in your source code and all kinds of stuff. And then the other side of it is, let's say, Sonar, for example. It doesn't need to be shared. You can have your sonar, we can all have our own sonar and we'll be fine. So it's a question of how much control you want to put and why versus how much of shared services you want to just force onto the teams. And I think we always keep this balance to the extent that we say if we have to provide a service as a shared service, we better be as good or more, much better than individual instance. So it's not like we are forcing it. We are standing up as a service and we are behaving like we are a service provider and you are your customer. If you like our service, you come to us. If you don't like our service, try to build your, and we'll learn from you the way you build so that we can bring some of these best practices into the shared service so that other people can get benefited.
Thanks. Another question here? Sorry, after you. So Justin from John Deere.
So I had a follow-up to both of you said that in your shared service model, you allow people to go do their own thing, which in the past, the term was used as shadow IT, doing the enterprise thing. So how does each of your companies manage those kind of different portions that are following your provisioning model, your deployment system or whatever they're doing their own thing? How do you manage making sure that they're doing the right thing, or do you basically say it's up to you to manage?
So, do I need to repeat that? I would, please. Yeah. So, yeah, shadow IT. It just is that's the topic. Why, shadow IT, the problems with that, how are we managing that? I would say in a lot of ways we've institutionalized it, right? So we encourage it. Part of what, when you say shadow IT, I think what happens there is the thought that we need to control IT, right? I mean, that's what, the central level. And yet what we have found that if you're imposing that control, you lose some flexibility. You lose agility at the edge, right? So you want to empower the edge. We have, like I said, shadow IT on top of shadow IT. We have some shadow IT organizations that have shadow IT organizations. No joke, right? Underneath them. And again, it's for the purposes of delivering the product, that experience, right? That content. Now, the interesting thing though is that there are some things that are super important across the company that have a all stop button, an EPO, if you will, and that's security. So we have global information security. Super important. That doesn't mean that the segments can't build their own. They do. In fact, every segment has a security organization, right? That shadows our main security organization. It's because they understand their particular use case. It's considerably different if you think about content protection versus safety on a cruise ship, right? I mean, so those are but at the end of the day, security is important. Our guest security and safety is number one, right? So getting that across all the enterprises is important. And so that stays at a top layer where a lot of the other things like mandating a particular way of using the CI pipeline or mandating a certain, even source control repository is given, there is enterprise service, but you're welcome to build your own. Right? So and there's that.
Yeah. So shadow IT, everybody has that, right? I think the point is you need to find out why those shadow ITs are there. And I think, in my mind, when I talk to developers, I find that the shadow ITs are created because that particular service or that particular quality of thing was not available as a shared service. That's why they are kind of forced into that shadow IT model. So the point is that, yes, shadow IT will pop up if that particular development team find that I don't have anybody helping me, so I'll build my own. So we have community of practices, reach out, come to the table kind of culture where we actually know if shadow IT pops up. We don't call that shadow IT. That's what we call emerging technologies, right? So you don't like this particular CI tool, okay, maybe it's not for you. Do you have a better choice? Yes, go build, see how it feels like, see if it meets all the requirements from compliance and security and all that. And if it is all okay, we are all onboarded, maybe some other teams will get benefited and we actually take that as a shared service. So yes, we know the shadow ITs, but they are not in shadows, they are actually emerging.
Right, we had a question there. Sorry. What is yours? Chad from CH Robinson.
So that's actually a very good question. So yes, we do use a Jenkins file for defining a lot of our CI processes. We're actually moving over to GitLab now. And part of that process is you build that process into your CI pipeline, right? There's certain checks that actually have to happen. So at the end of our pipeline, there's actually a script per se that actually makes sure that certain tests are actually being ran. That's how it allows us to kind of promote and safeguard from a developer being able to remove a test that actually has to happen. But a lot of it comes with like trust, right? We actually give them full access to that file for them to actually change the CI process as they see fit, as they're adding on more features. You have to have a certain level of trust to understand that they're not going to remove a test that's actually required.
Yeah. Just real quick context on that, though. That's so we have a lot of different models. Back to the whole point I was making about the very distributed autonomy. In the particular case you're talking about.
For the movies anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of talking about Jenkins, so Jenkins 2.0 pipeline as code is new, right? And the people who have been doing Jenkins pipeline for a while have a mix of things, which is number one, local configuration within Jenkins, and then local combination mixed with workflow plugin and Groovy script, and then the Jenkins file, which is completely declarative, right? We have all three variations, right? If we take the Jenkins file and it goes to GitHub, any change is peer reviewed, right? You cannot merge to the master branch. So if you are taking unit tests out, then we catch it there. Number two, if it is a mix of local configuration or local Groovy file script, then my point is that we need to detect if somebody is actually taking out, for example, sonar scan from that. And you cannot do those things from being into Jenkins. You have to actually detect that by being outside of Jenkins, which is collect your pipeline data and see if the unit testing actually was done. Do I have that data? The static code analysis date timestamp. It came from Sonar, which said that it happened before your build. So that means you didn't do it for the current build, and you kind of stop the pipeline.
So a question over there from, what's your name? Yeah.
So Tisson, Mathew, the question is, how do you drive DevOps transformation and then, articulating the value of it to the business? Or is it more, because it's already siloed, and how do you actually drive the transformation through? Yeah. Yeah. So I can tell you a story around it. I was the director of engineering at Amazon. We are literally thousands of teams. We're fully enabled to be autonomous. We had somewhat of a baseline engineering stack, one engineering system. So it's mostly available now in AWS with a variety of different services. And then I went to a healthcare company, fairly large size, 10 billion revenue, about 700 engineers or so, but very siloed. So architects did architect things. Developers did developer things. Infrastructure people did infrastructure things. And then my first try was, create one team that is end-to-end, that can plan, build, deploy. It was such a nightmare to even do one single team, right? So I think organizational transformation starts with that first team. And I can tell you, my experience, that first team was not a success initially. And we tried it again because they were not getting to a level of maturity compared to the siloed organizations. Like, so security and infrastructure team was so solid in deployment. They were slow, but they were good at what they were doing. They were scanning all the code, they were making sure all the checklists are there, they deployed it right, but it would take them a week and a half to do it. And now we're integrated teams to do that within a very short period of time and to reach the level of maturity that the enterprise is looking for. That is a challenge because these silos are inherently good at that particular thing. So it took us almost 6 months to 9 months to even get to a level of maturity for this team to take on the whole thing. So we first did planning and dev, and then deployments were still manual by the infrastructure team. And then we did a lot of education to them on AWS and all the tools that you guys were talking about to get to a level of maturity. So it takes time, but I would say don't give up on it. So because it's hard to, sometimes hard to articulate the value of it to the business. Why you have to spend all this money hiring DevOps people, because you have to build those. And you can't just say that other people are doing it. You know, it's like, look at Capital One is doing it, Disney is doing it, you know? So, but they'll say, why you, right? So that's been an experience. But overall, that organization has now transformed. You can, so they were on AWS, you know, reInvent. Actually, it's happening 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now. They're actually doing large industry sessions. There was like 800 people in there, DevOps, security and DevOps in healthcare. And they are the ones who are doing it. They were the ones who assisted this like 2 years ago. And they're the ones now up on the stage giving the presentation. So it can happen, yeah.
Yeah, I think for Disney, at least Jason and I could probably do what kind of like take your question and split it into two. For at least my team, like within Disney, my engineers are directly embedded with the devs. We're pair programming with them. We're in the sprints. We are working with them with the code, understanding how they're coding, right? And in return, they're also understanding how infrastructure works, understanding how we do our deployments. They're also on call, right? They're not just tossing it over the wall to SC and having us deal with it. They're actually on call with us, and we kind of do a more of like a separation of concerns on when we actually reach out to the dev, right? I think Jason can probably talk about our journey on like how we got there.
And I think that's kind of covering more of where I see that we're headed, which is the T-shaped teams. There can be teams that are formed that are full stack and operate that way. A lot of times we have more of this matrix effect, right? So you form a T-shaped team that is operating that product, right? And the T-shape, everyone gets that, right? From the horizontal, maybe you understand the whole area and you have a depth of expertise. And so you have individuals on the team that have an expertise in the language or have an expertise in the infrastructure network. So, we still have teams that are very much the traditional way and will probably be that way. I mentioned one kind of in the talk where when we launch a product to our parks, an attraction, that's intended to run for 10 years. Right? So from an iterative development, right, process, it's a challenge for us. And we have operations teams that have to be there and are reacting to park operations that are separate from the development teams that are building the code. So things like that will continue to exist, I believe. We're just trying to blur the lines, right? I mean, understand more of their space and bring some of that feedback back into the next project, right, as those loops happen. But there are a lot that are, as we think of the digital transformation and digital products, they're going more of the path that Brian just mentioned, our space.
Sorry,
You may have a good...
did you want to go ask a question?
I'm Jason Cox from Brady. One question I have is around test data management and testing. You're ready to, first of all, the version control that. And second is, how do I create the metadata link between, test the user story, the code, the test data, and the test.
Okay. Yes, as I said, everything has source code. That includes your test cases, whatever. It's Gherkin script, Selenium, whatever that case is. It's source controlled. Yes, they are source controlled. Number two, test data management. We use some popular test data management tool, and the test data shows up in some kind of the configuration shows up in some kind of XML or JSON. I'm not sure which one. But yes, this data is not source control, but the scripts are source control, meaning pulling data from production, wiping out the necessary stuff, and putting in, that is source control. Apart from that, connection between user stories and test case is a problem. And that a problem because you need to make sure every Gherkin feature file has the tag that relates back to the Jira or whatever story. And it's a question of discipline between the development, right? It's very hard because that's where the actual human touch comes in. And it's very hard to automate those kind of things unless you go into some kind of natural language processing of your test cases. And so, I mean, that's not going to happen soon. But yes, that's the human discipline that we need. It's very hard to implement that enterprise-wide. You can do it localized in smaller teams, but at least from my experience, yes, we got some success, and yes, we have some failures too.
I'll add a different dimension to it. So how many of you know about behavior-driven development, BDD? It's a few. Okay. So I have experience with a few teams actually went to BDD for exactly the same reasons you're talking about. So the product managers really were writing Gherkin, which is the BDD, ways how the behavior of the application would be. And they're writing requirements almost like code. And product managers are writing it. And they know, like for example, healthcare, we have to use de-identified data for testing. We can't really use real data. So how do we de-identify the data? How do you manage privacy when it actually goes to production? So they have to go both ways. So BDD really helped them to understand the behavior of the applications. And then test naturally came with it because if you write BDD scripts, so we use Clojure and Cucumber. So Clojure and Cucumber were, there is a book called Brave and True. If you actually Google it, it's a very nice book about BDD. So if you were writing highly secure, trust-driven, behavior-driven application that are very sensitive, dealing with a lot of sensitive data, I would strongly recommend taking a look at it. It's not a fit for everybody. If you try to do that for, so there'll be some people who say this is overkill for us, so, but for some of the teams who wants to do BDD, it's a great way to get started.
Thank you. Question about that back there, sorry.
So Steph from Teammate. So my question is, how did you approach and define microservices? I mean, how do you know you've gone too granular versus how do you know it's too big?
So I feel, at least over at Disney and for my area, I feel that a single service should have one job. So for example, within my Movies Anywhere, a microservice might be a lab profile service, right? And its whole job is to pretty much return back your lab profile data, and that's its only job. Second service might be providing authentication, right? So you want to target that service only really does one job good.
I'll immediately say next question, please. So I was hired at Capital One as an enterprise architect, especially focusing on SOA. And I don't know if anybody remembers that term, SOA, but during that time, everybody struggled hard in finding out SOA, the services, the granularity of the services, atomic services, compound services, complex services, orchestration, all. I think the same thing is again coming back in microservices. So I'll go back to my answer. Next question, please.
I can probably comment on a couple of things from experience. One is we tried two approaches to this. So coming from Amazon was very similar to a SOA world where we are coarse-grained in services. We had thousands of coarse-grained services. They were not fine-grained. And the teams were really fine-graining them as they went along. Right? And then we connect these together to build large-scale business applications. And then I went to a new company where they had monolithic stuff everywhere. That was not service-oriented at all. The advantage is that every functionality is in one application. You don't have to shuttle around different services. Where do you start? So one approach we took was starting as fine-grained as possible. We went by the book, right? So a single business function, single team, allocate resources. But we ended up with too much time thinking and not writing any code, just going back and forth and back and forth. Oh, this service name is wrong, or oh, this is too granular, or whatever, right? Or the other way around is we're starting with something larger. So what we ended up doing is something called alignment and autonomy. Alignment is aligning your capabilities to the business. So what are you trying to deliver, right? So if you start there, probably as a little monolithic or coarse-grained, and then you can always drive down, refactoring down to fine-grained. Which really made the business happy because they were getting something out of it. Otherwise, they were like, you got 40 microservices, what is it doing really? So what functionality is it delivering to the business? So that got traction with the team. Now we're in a continuous journey of this fine-grained, and to his point, the old SOA concepts are coming back. Like there is some new thing called mini service now, which is a composition, right? So it's coming back because you have to integrate these fine-grained services. So yeah.
I actually want to ask, go back to one of our previous questions I just thought may be relevant here about shared services, shadow IT, and federated. I want to actually ask my co-presenter about her viewpoint from audit compliance governance perspective. Do you have any viewpoint to shared services versus localized shadow ITs, and what makes you more comfortable, or what gives you more discomfort rather?
Sure, I can talk about that. I would say, when I first joined Capital One a couple years ago, we were federating everything, and that was a little concerning to me, being a governance risk management former auditor. There are some things that, from a control perspective, especially if you are a publicly traded company and you are concerned about, having SOX compliance. If you have SOX applications, you need to make sure they are following certain requirements and not doing anything that could potentially put you at risk. So we've kind of swung back the pendulum some, and definitely there are things that we are recommending be centralized and be done at the enterprise level. Certain deployment tools, certain workflow that allows us to check all of the various things in the change management processes that are key to making sure we stay compliant with SOX and being aware of risk management. So I would say there is definitely, you want to make sure that the things that you're federating are not putting you at risk. And you really want to make sure that what needs to be centralized are things that, your regulators care about that could potentially put you at risk. So definitely, from my perspective, it needs to be a balance, and you don't want to federate too much. I understand, keeping everything centralized doesn't give your teams as much flexibility. You can't go out there and run with your builds as much, but you definitely need to make sure you are not putting your company at risk or in a potential non-compliant situation, because obviously that will be a lot more costly in the long run. So definitely think about, if I federate this, what does that do? What does that mean for my risk, from a risk perspective? And definitely get, your key governance, your key risk management folks involved so that they can provide a way in on that to make sure you're not federating too much.
Thank you. Just got one here and then over there. So. What's your name, sorry? Igor.
My name is Igor. I'm from 260 Degrees from Australia. My question is to Jason and Brian. I thought it always was and is Windows to the future. And the jump that Amazon did from Amazon bookstore to AWS was a huge one. So do you plan to do something similar?
Bookstore?
Great magic there.
Some magic in the IT area? Can you do it?
You're talking about let me see if I can try to rephrase the question. You're asking that looking at like Amazon, started with the bookstore, and of course the transition to AWS. So you see this big leap over into providing IT services. Is that the question? So does Disney have a plan to essentially do the same type of thing?
Absolutely different.
Oh, sure, right, yeah, okay. Yeah, will there be something different? Yes, right, I think Disney does do that, right? I feel like, but from a core standpoint, right, we're an entertainment company, right? I think that's core. I think that's that's the direction, that's what we orbit, right? So whatever we do would tend to orbit that, right? So I think that there will be, and there's announcements that have been made by our CEO, even recently at the quarterly earnings call, et cetera. We're going to come to market with some things related to that, entertainment, and hopefully look for some ways that can be disruptive, transformative, even in that case. That's how we stay relevant.
IT definitely needs some entertainment.
Is that what you're saying? Yes, there he goes.
Sorry, we had a question at the back there. Your name, sorry? Thomas.
So you said you have about 300 products that are being continuously deployed on the average about 4 times a day. Yeah, that sounds really great. Am I right to assume that sort of the core systems that hold account balances and transactions on are not part of that? And if so, why not? Or if they are, what are they?
So the core systems that run on legacy platforms such as AS400, there's a good thing and a bad thing. Bad thing is that it's very hard to automate those things. The good thing is that they don't change that often. What changes is the top level, right? So yes, there are many cores. Some of the cores have been rewritten into modern day languages. They go through these kind of changes that I just talked about. But the actual card, if you talk about the whole authorization systems and all that, they don't change that often. I don't know last time when somebody changed the interface for authorizing card swipes. I don't remember. Maybe it was before I was born. So to answer your questions, the applications that we talked about kind of mostly live on that higher layer as opposed to kind of the deep down into the stack. But some of the core systems that we are now on running on cloud actually go through the same life cycle that I just talked about. They actually deliver 4 times a day on an average.
And there are some SaaS apps that are doing that as well. We follow Agile in all of our app delivery, and I've definitely seen, not maybe 4 times a day, but several times a month we'll make changes to some of the SaaS applications.
You work will probably a little bit of training to go into it at first, but maybe you'll become better as possible.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. If you keep those right controls in place and make sure you're mindful of governance, definitely.
It's like, you start the car and then you drive at 10 miles per speed, back out, and then, ultimately go 60 miles. So we are somewhere in between.
Great. Another question from gentleman here. Sorry. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Raj. I represent
Raj.
CIS. You're pretty mature on Python stuff, and we deliver maybe 4 or 5 times a day also. But one of the issues that we are dealing with right now is we have similar systems that they used to go through the office. And we just don't know how to integrate or DevOps or automate that process. Any suggestions, any help on that from you guys?
Can you explain a little more on the operational
Yeah,
testing?
what do you mean by operational
So in
testing?
the operational testing, what we do is we actually go and check how the field offices perform their daily work, and there are certain parameters that we work against. So let's say if you want to say the processing time for N400 is like 50%.
So is that part of your user acceptance testing? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not part of the user acceptance testing. So we go out on the field and work with a lot of different people to see how fast they're processing and so on. If you guys are familiar with them, so some of you guys are, some of you guys are not.
I mean, we do go through periodic stress test.
It's not a stress test also, so it's different.
Okay.
I mean, operational testing is usually not performed in the commercial side, it's mostly on the government side. So we're just trying to figure out a way how to automate that process, and maybe I'm not explaining the question right.
Maybe we can take that offline.
Yeah, we'll take it offline. Sorry, I've got lady here was next. What was your name, sorry? Bank Columbia. Thank you.
We are starting our DevOps course, and we are university. And I want to know, talk about products that you are planning to make, what is planning to do that?
So, yes, so slay the monolith, go into microservices architecture. The whole idea is we have seen that if you have monolithic application, then you cannot achieve the speed that we want to achieve. And the whole idea is there are a few things. One is start rewriting or take pieces and parts out of it and create microservices and hook them up slowly until they die in the vine. Or even start from scratch. I know that at least one of our applications, such monolithic applications, was actually rewritten in Go languages. So it's see, he loves me already.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's our goal because we realize that, and we are 100% sure and convince ourselves that with monolithic applications, you can do build pipelines and all that thing that you just talked about, but it's not going to gain that speed that we are achieving for.
It's basically the strangler pattern, right? Right. Yeah. And we've seen the same thing.
It just takes time, right? You have
So
to
that-
work through it.
So the lady in the purple at the back there is next. Sorry.
Good question. So at least within my team, my engineers are the architects, right? We work with the dev team to architect the entire application, but there are certain areas, right, that do have that dedicated person that is the architect, and we simply work closely with them to define what the architecture and design is, and we incorporate that into our best practices.
So this question is very near and dear to me because I was part of enterprise architecture when I started at Capital One. So there are various levels of or types of architecture, if you will. So every software needs architecture, but if every software needs enterprise architecture or not is a question. And it also depends upon how you have defined your enterprise architecture. Is it just a bunch of white papers and a PowerPoint diagram? Or is it a domain diagram that goes to all the class level interactions or all that? So the later part is always going to be there, the software architecture, and that belongs to the product team itself. Now the enterprise architecture, depending upon what kind of organizations you are, may only talk about thou shall only use AWS and that's it. Thou shall only use RDS and that's it. Those are the things that are kind of followed by all the team. And yes, they are not part and parcel of everyday delivery process, but they are making that long-term decisions and a roadmap for the whole company. So yes, so depending upon how you define your architecture, they may or may not be in that DevOps pipeline on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so I got one there, lady there. That's you, sorry.
Hi, I'm Sonny Sperda with DOES17. We've actually started our DevOps here in about a year and a half in. I hold operations side, the build engineering, the big DevOps support side, application support. One of my challenges right now is organizational transformation. So we are a very siloed organization that has architecture, et cetera. And now I'm trying to develop that pipeline. How did you handle the skill gap? Because the one thing I don't want to do is to bring in new guys, and that kind of shows my team, hey, do they have faith in me, or where am I going to come from? So how did you handle that?
Oh, you want me to take it? Go ahead. So I'm trying to summarize the question. Let's see.
How did you handle the skills gap when you had to try to introduce DevOps?
There you go. That's really it. Is that good? Excellent. So first of all, right, we care about people, right? So back to your point, I think that's the right question. Is like, how do we take engineers where they are that have those skills gaps and bring them up to where they need to be, right? Because we know it's going to change. Part of it is how are you creating a learning culture inside your company to encourage them to lean forward to take that. And we went on a journey where we did. We brought people in, so typical operations specialists, no coding skill set, but maybe in Bash, maybe a Python, a little bit here, right there. And we said, we're defining all infrastructure through code, right? We're going to a new world, right? And that was a first step for us. And it was about getting the training to those individuals to understand this is the best coding practices. I mean, it's basics, right? Software engineering basics. That's how you check code in. You got to start there, right? And I think that's really important that we invest in our existing talent that's there, because they probably have a passion. There's probably a reason why they're there, and they resonate with the mission of the company. Why not invest with them, in them? That doesn't mean that you can't also bring in outside luminaries. And I think it's really important that as you add to the team, bring in those that will be inspiring to the others. And I think that's what we did. We saw that happen. Those who were added to the company begin to influence because they're sitting right next to the team. They're all working the same direction, but they look over and they see what they're doing. I want to do that too. Teach me that. And that was probably the best training of all, was bringing in that new sharp talent, place them into those teams, and becoming the ignition, right, to light that fire in those different groups.
As well to educate others within that team as well, right?
Exactly.
I mean, for us, there are three different streams. One is hire new people, of course, retrain the existing people, and then mix people. And by that, what I mean is, I have seen, at least personally, by doing code reviews, that normal application developers write better infrastructure code when given a chance. When I see Jenkins pipeline with an API call and try-catch block, I'm like, that is written by a developer. That is not written by an ops guy, and which is good. So there are this kind of thing, and there is a huge investment that is needed from an organizational perspective to actually train and certify people. For example, Capital One, we have highest number of AWS certified engineers after AWS. That was a big investment, and everything is paid by the company.
Yeah, and you need to make sure your governance folks understand that enough too. I have people on my team who are getting AWS certified because I want to make sure we can talk the talk and speak the language.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I know close to hands, but there's a question over there first. What's your name, sorry? Punamum from American Airlines.
So there are a few touch points, and it's always going to be there. So number one, I need my repository in GitHub. You don't need to talk to anybody. You just go in, create your repository, you are done. I need to get my Jenkins build. All you need to do is go in, log into Jenkins and create your builds, and if you need help, you can talk to somebody who is there as a shared service provider. Then there are security group creation. That is centralized, and we have automated that too. So all you do is basically do a pull request, and it gets reviewed by security architect. They all say, GitHub reviews, it looks good, LGTM, whatever that case may be, and it goes and changes your security group. So there are a few touch points that will remain centralized because it's not that they cannot be automated, it's because you need more eyes into those than just one delivery team who may or may not know all the details, right? So because it's very complex when you actually get there. So yes, I don't know if I have answered your question. So there is a few touch points, but they're very minimal. I mean, on AWS? Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that takes long. Then you have to go, you're talking about opening up port 22, right? And all that crazy stuff. Yeah, that takes a while. That takes a lot of discussion, and those are, when we discover them, the people who actually handle the whole process of opening up ports back to the data center, they node them, and then actually they track them. And since our CIO said that all the applications will be in AWS by next year or so,
There'll
we
be
know
no more
that
data centers.
Thank you. There's a question from the table in the middle, Andrew, over there, and then you.
I have an example right here sitting next to me, Jennifer. She's not like technology application, banking applications. You are pure governance, risk management, and she's talking about AWS stuff these days.
But I think even like non-technology, like you see
I'm not a techie person. I have an undergrad in accounting and a master's in
She
finance.
knows Jenkins jobs.
Yes, I would say you need to really, help educate your lines of business. We have tech built into every part of our lines of, like every line of business has their own mini tech function. So it helps to really make sure everyone understands what AWS is, what does moving to the cloud mean. So I think, if you truly want to transform your organization, you have to make sure they're educated on technology and help, make them aware of all of the risks and what it means. I see that we have lines of business folks, like pretty much everyone that I interface with, they can understand our technology enough to do what they need to do. You just have to kind of help them along that journey and help them talk the talk.
Yeah, look, I think it's pretty obvious that the artist, right, your business teams, they're all becoming technologists, right? I mean, in this regard, right? They know how to use their iPhone, Android. They know how to use the internet. They know how to use Amazon.com. They expect that, right? So I think driven to the point of that they are now entering the equation where before it was kind of like they had a requirement. They needed something, and so they came to us, technologists, to solve it. They're now solving it in their own heads, right? So they are becoming part of the equation by the very digital native future growth that we're seeing across all our organizations. So everyone's, in some sense, becoming a technologist, which I think is brilliant, right? You heard what I feel about technology. But to your point, which is it disrupting those teams and so their processes to be able to create that full loop, right? The feedback loop as well as, and we are seeing that. So there's cases where you would have designers, right, artists that would used to create wireframes, and that was that thing that became part of the requirements thing. It was finally handed over to the technology teams. Well, no longer, right? I mean, they're looking for cases where let's prototype, right? Let's build prototyping platforms that is part of a full cycle. So those tools, right, that now that these designers are using are helping write the code, right? And they're seeing the feedback fairly immediately, right? It goes to then the development team sees it and it comes back to them and they can make iterative changes and that flows back. And it's removing some of that friction and some of the things would get hung up and just rejected in the past because they can get that more immediate feedback, which is important.
Good, thanks. We've got a question here and then one there. How do you articulate leadership value to the business to get DevOps buy-ins?
I think at least for my team, it's you have to show it, right? You have to demo it. And I think they see the value as we provide more faster processes, allowing them to get value-added features out to production a lot faster. And over time, they actually start to see that value add and understanding, oh, this DevOps team is actually working. And again, DevOps is more of like a culture, right? So you have to kind of shift that culture, find those champions within your company that can drive that culture and make that change. And leadership will actually come in and actually see that. And I think at Disney, we've totally done that, and our leadership is fully behind it. I mean, this is my boss sitting right here, like right next to me, right? Definitely pushing DevOps, and I think, again, it's just a major culture change that you have to kind of show.
So for my, go ahead.
So I think since I worked at Amazon, the way the company came about doing DevOps or decoupling the whole business into service teams and two pizza teams was all about the customer. So if the customer wants to change or want to value, in a traditional world, they had to wait a long time. So first it goes to marketing, then it goes to the salespeople, then it goes to IT department. It takes so much cycle time to deliver value back to the consumer. So with the transformation of product teams and autonomy for these services, the gap between the consumer of the service and the people who are building it has been shortened. So they can go straight to, quote unquote, to these service teams, and they can inherently deliver value really quickly. That means a lot to the business because you can respond much faster than your competitors, right? So that is, if you can articulate that in real financial metrics to pure leadership, where your CEO and your board understands it, they know it's valuable to decouple your company.
So from my perspective, I have completely failed in explaining what DevOps is to anyone. So business partners and senior leadership. So I think what I went back to was instead of answering what is DevOps, I started answering why is DevOps, and I think that makes more sense. Delivering high quality software faster. And then I explained delivering high quality software was there 50 years ago. And nobody can claim that the things that have been developed over the last few decades were bad, right? They are all high quality software. What changed is that last word, faster. And every business owner will actually appreciate that. Hey, if you can deliver this to me faster, I would be happy. And I think the whole question of what is DevOps, what the culture change means, goes away completely.
Thank you. We're running out of time. I think we've just got one more question. The guy in the navy blue shirt there at the back. So you were next. Yeah. Chris Richardson from Verizon. Is that? What's happened to architecture views?
So, yeah, I think for my team, that's moved more into more of like a peer review, right? That that diagram or that flow gets peer reviewed across different members of the team, and then we work with our InfoSec teams to provide that guidance, right, and to layer on top that threat model, that we can see those issues a lot faster.
I can comment on it. So Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft now. So Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft now, for about 4 years, he drove a transformation in Microsoft called One Engineering System. It's called One ES. It's pretty publicly written. They figured out a way to consolidate a set of foundational things across all service teams. That includes architecture, information security, compliance, how they build software, and then scale autonomy to the other. They call it alignment and autonomy. So how do you align to the business and then decouple across? So it's pretty well written across now in the industry. So as you can see, the company who was, pretty much everybody discarded 4 years ago, they added $300 billion into their market cap over the last 4 years. And One Engineering System, or One ES, is a foundation of it. So architecture is in One ES. So you can't really build anything in Microsoft without One ES. So you are inherently in it. So you really can't go siloed and do your own thing. They used to do that. And then Word had their own architecture, PowerPoint came up with their own, and it was completely siloed. So it's a public read.
Thank you. We're going to have to stop there. We're right out of time, but you can take it offline, hopefully. Just thank you to the panel. If you have to give a round of applause, thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.